The ANC has controlled politics in South Africa for 3 decades, but not anymore. The African National Congress has lost its majority for the first time since taking power. So what's behind the setback, and how will it shape politics in the country? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Tom McRae. It's a vote that's ended 30 years of the ANC's dominance in South African politics. Voters dealt a blow to the African National Congress, angry at what they consider to be its failure to deal with a dire economy and poverty. Now the party will have to engage in talks with rivals to form a coalition government. So what concessions might it make, and what does a weakened ANC mean for politics in the country? We will talk to our guests in just a moment, but first, this report by Ibtissam Ginford.
A historic plunge in support for the party in power for 30 years. The governing African National Congress, or ANC, had won a majority in every election since the end of apartheid.
The results...
But on Wednesday, it got about 40% of the votes in general elections, a fall of roughly 17% on 2019. With unemployment high and poverty widespread, many voters feel disillusioned.
It's a lesson for ANC that they got 40%, that they must speed up their system and do service delivery to the people, because the people are hungry, people are struggling.
The ANC's setback was partly due to the former president. Jacob Zuma resigned in 2018 following a series of corruption scandals. Back in South African politics with his newly founded MK party, he pulled support away from the ANC. His party came third nationally with 15% of the votes and won in the KwaZulu-Natal province, or KZN, formerly an ANC stronghold.
We needed change to start from somewhere. And I'm glad being a part of KZN, bringing about the change and saying, you know what, we are tired of what this is, we are trying to take a new direction, and hopefully this new direction will bring change.
Another breakaway party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, helped split the votes, along with the Democratic Alliance movement coming second. The ANC will now have to form a coalition government to stay in power. It's also been undermined by rising crime rates, corruption scandals, and constant power blackouts.
The ANC used to be the political party that has been there for the black majority, only to find out that they are not there.
With Parliament due to elect a president in the next 14 days, it's uncertain whether Cyril Ramaphosa can keep the top job.
We won't engage with the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa. We can have a discussion with the ANC. But the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa? How is that possible?
From a liberation movement under Nelson Mandela, the ANC came to power with promises of prosperity for all and greater equality. Promises many South Africans say it's failed to deliver, and they can only hope a coalition might do better. Ibtissam Ginford, Al Jazeera.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. From Johannesburg is Malaika. She's a researcher at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation. From Cape Town, Jan Hofmeyr, who heads the Policy and Analysis Programme at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. And also from Johannesburg, Mondli Makhanya, who is Editor-in-Chief of the City Press newspaper. Thanks very much for joining us here on Inside Story and what is a fascinating time in South African politics. First of all, Mondli, before we get to the coalition negotiations, I just want to talk a little bit about the issues that the ANC has had through this election. What do you put this massive drop in support down to?
It is, as you say, a massive drop. Like it was a catastrophic outing for them. I think the main things are basically the lack of delivery to South Africans, to ordinary people. You have had water shortages. The issue of electricity in South Africa is massive. It's been an international story. The fact that we have what we call here load shedding, but actually it's power outages. And and basic things at the local level, at roads, and there's unemployment, there's massive poverty. And the thing is, people have not seen a change in any improvement in delivery by this government. There was hope that once the Jacob Zuma era had ended, that Cyril Ramaphosa would begin to improve service delivery, that kind of like that would be an improvement in the fight against corruption. But all of that has not happened. And that, I think, are the major reasons why the ANC has seen a huge drop. And I think also just very briefly, and the entry of and I'm sure we'll get there at some point, the entry of the Umkhonto weSizwe party
Yes.
Has had a huge impact, because those are primarily ANC voters who moved over to that party looking for some kind of hope.
Yeah, indeed. Malaika, do you agree with that assessment, that this is catastrophic for the ANC and it's basically been down to their inability to deliver?
I mean, I think part of it is that. I think there certainly is that is part of it. I don't think that it is a true characterization to say that the ANC has not delivered anything, right? I do think that perhaps the problem may be that there is a glacial pace of transformation, a glacial pace of some of the more, salient and critical issues in South Africa. I mean, quite a number of opposition parties, including even smaller opposition parties that have emerged in this election, some of the key issues that they raise, and it's a common thread amongst these opposition parties, the EFF, the MK, UAT, and others, is issues such as things like the land question, In fact, on the 29th of May, when we were having the election, there was an entire community in South Africa called Kiskamazook, where the community refused to participate in the voting process. And their argument was that the reason for their protest was that they have had a land claim since 1996 that has not been resolved. So I think one of the things that is very interesting about this election that isn't spoken about enough is the recurring and the re-emerging theme about the lack of that, the glacial pace of transformation, and particularly as it relates to the land question that the ANC government has over the last 30 years not been able to resolve. But I also do agree then with Mondli about the issues of the MK. But I mean, I think, and to understand the MK, the emergence of the MK and the emergence of the EFF and all other parties that have really emerged out of, the rupture within the ANC, is to speak about the failure of internal resolution of internal conflict within the ANC. I think the ANC has proven itself to be an organization that is incapable, or unwilling rather, to deal with internal contradictions and internal conflict in a manner that maintains cohesion and that maintains the strength of the organization. Every time there is an internal rupture in the ANC, the failure to resolve those internal contradictions has often led to the split of the party. In the last 30 years, we have seen 4 parties splitting out of the ANC, and I think that's something worth reflecting upon.
Yeah, indeed. Jan, I want to go to you now. I mean, is that how you see it as well, that it's basically an inability for the ANC to have really made any real progress with so many issues in South Africa, that has seen their drop in popularity?
Yeah, well, I would agree with my colleagues. I think, looking at it in a more sort of overarching way, I would like to say that the ANC has really become the victim of its own hubris, particularly over the past decade and a half. It was a party deeply divided, a party that was obsessed with itself at the expense of its constituency, and as a result of the former two, also a party that really lacked focus and attention over this period. And as such, one has seen sort of factionalism emerging over the years. In the first decade and a half, largely along the lines of ideology. In the past decade and a half, increasingly along the lines of personality and patronage. And that has had a cost for society at large.
Yeah. Mondli, for people who are outside of South Africa and watching this, can you just give us a sense of what it is actually like there at the moment? I mean, it really is uncharted waters for the country. Is there a feeling of uncertainty about what is going to happen next?
Well, if you have a governing party that has been in power for 30 years, that's all that the people of South Africa have ever had, and there was always certainty that the ANC will win the elections. And now you have a sense, the ANC is down from 57% to 40%. And now people in this country do not know what the shape of the next government is going to be. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of speculation. Obviously, business wants to know how the new coalition government will look like. And ordinary people actually want to know what it is that kind of like what their future looks like for the next 5 years. But but there's also another element that people are actually seeing democracy at work. That actually you do not need to have the certainty of a one party that is always going to govern the country. That actually kind of like that accountability will be better going forward. That over the next 5 years, that the ANC, even though it is still the majority party, will be afraid of losing power, and that it will be more responsive to the demands of the people. And so there is a sense of optimism as well as a sense of uncertainty.
Yeah. Malaika, do you agree with that sentiment that, that this could actually be a good thing for South Africa, that there's not just one party in total control?
Look, I mean, I'm a bit guarded, right? I do agree. I certainly do agree with Mondli that the sentiment on the ground is that, this is democracy at work. I think, I'm surely by now, that there is some disagreements with the outcome. The MK party and other smaller parties have challenged the outcome of the election and have in fact called for a recounting. In fact, initially it was a recounting, and now they are saying an entire re-election, right? An entire voting process. And of course, so there are those, concerns and so on and so forth. There is that. But I mean, I do think that overall, there is a bit of there is some optimism about, what this means for democracy and the democratic project in South Africa. I think Mondli is correct that, for the last 30 years, South Africa has largely been, has largely had a dominant party political system where even though there were other political parties, the ANC has been the governing party. It has always maintained a majority. But I mean, I do think that, Mondli, as well, there is a sense of anxiety because in the last few years, and particularly since the 2016 local government election, you will remember that in South Africa, we have two types of election. We've got the general election where we elect the national government and the provincial governments. That's what we had on the 29th. But we also have another process that happens usually 2 years before that. And that's that local government election. And that's where we elect municipal government or government at a local level. And what we have seen since 2016 in South Africa has been the emergence of coalition governments at local government level. In the city of in the Gauteng province, which is the economic nerve center of the South African economy, there are about 3 metropolitan municipalities. These are category A municipalities, very big municipalities with a lot of resources. And in the 2016 election, the ANC lost all but one of those. And even where it maintained the governance in that municipality, was through a coalition government in the city of Ekurhuleni. It lost the city of Johannesburg, it lost the city of Tshwane, and it lost other metropolitan municipalities in the country. And what happened after that was that we had quite a lot of unstable coalitions. We had a lot of instability in all of these coalitions, save for the city of Ekurhuleni. There was a lot of instability which affected service delivery, a lot of instability which affected the stability of democratic institutions within those municipalities. And so that did create, a sense of concern for quite a number of people about, what is so I suppose one of the things that then it creates is that a lot of people are wondering that if we have had, coalition governments in the country, and particularly at metro level, that have been so unstable and brought about so much instability and uncertainty, what does it look like if we were to then take that and transpose it into a bigger, space
to the national level,
national and international government? Yeah, there is that anxiety as well.
Yeah, well, the ANC Secretary-General has just spoken on that point, and he said, as a nation, we will stand together against those who threaten violence and instability. Jan, is there a real chance that violence could actually break out in the wake of these results?
I think it is highly unlikely if you look at the way in which our democracy sort of has been consolidated over the past 30 years. I think there is much in it for us to give confidence that that violence or instability is not really an option. I think what we may see is some sort of very intense contestation over the next couple of weeks to ensure that a government of some sort is being formed. But I do not think the prospect of instability at this point is that strong. Having said that, Also, a project that we work on at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation is the Afrobarometer, which is the continental survey that looks at issues of democracy and trust in institutions, etc. And so what we have seen over the past decade and a half or so has been that there has been a decline in trust in particular political sort of institutions. In other words, the way in which these institutions mediate conflict sort of within society. And I think what we will see now in the next couple of weeks is how strong these institutions are and the extent to which they can cope with the stresses being placed on them.
Yeah, indeed. I want to move on now to what the coalition could actually look like. Mondli, what options does the ANC realistically have here? Who will be their first pick to be a coalition partner with?
Well, yeah, that is a really difficult one for the ANC at this particular point. They've got 40%. And if they had been closer to 50, let's say 47, 48, as some polls were kind of like the more optimistic polls were saying, they would have actually been able to cobble together some smaller parties that they could dominate. Now they need bigger parties. And the next 2 to 3 big parties is the Democratic Alliance, which is ideologically not in sync with the ANC. It's a much more liberal mark. Yeah. And then you have the Umkhonto weSizwe party, which is basically formed by Jacob Zuma, who's an enemy of Cyril Ramaphosa, and everything that the MK party stands for, the ANC does not stand for. They are anti-constitution, they are anti the judiciary, etc., etc. I know I've used shorthand, but they're opposed to most of the fundamentals of the foundations of South Africa, the 1994 deal that South Africa went into. And then you have the EFF, which basically kind of like the ANC could work with. Ideologically, there is much more alignment, but the EFF has tended to be more disruptive of governance. Malaika pointed out earlier on that in some of the municipalities where there are coalitions, that there's been a lot of instability. And the EFF has been a large cause of that because they know how to use power to exact concessions from the majority party, which is the ANC. So if the ANC were to go into coalition with the EFF at the national level, you can imagine the kinds of demands that they would make and concessions that they would make of the ANC, which the ANC would not want to, because the ANC is very conscious of investor sentiment and market sentiment, etc., etc.
Malaika, do you think that the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, could actually ever work with EFF and Jacob Zuma?
Certainly. I mean, the ANC already is in a coalition with the EFF, for example, in the city of Ekurhuleni. It's a metropolitan municipality where the OR Tambo International Airport is located. The EFF and the ANC are working in a coalition there. There is a similar setup in the city of Johannesburg. So I do think, and I think maybe this is important. I need to say this first before I just give a bit of a brief explanation of this, right? The EFF was founded in 2013 and contested the first elections, the general elections, the following year in 2014. Now, the EFF was established by the former leader of the ANC Youth League, Julius Malema, and other leaders of the ANC Youth League, Floyd Shivambu, and so on. Now, we must understand that when the EFF was founded, it was founded on a principle of what it calls 7 cardinal pillars. Those 7 cardinal pillars are a direct regurgitation of conference resolutions of the 24th National Congress of the ANC Youth League. And it also champions, it speaks about championing of the Freedom Charter. Now, these are ANC foundational literature, really. The MK party, unfortunately, I mean, I do agree with Mondli that there are some personality issues, but insofar as really concretizing its ideological standpoint and policy standpoint, we still don't know. Because the MK party, in fact, does not have any policies, and they do have a manifesto, what they call a People's Manifesto, but it's very brief, very generic. It's just 8.
The other point, though, is that you talk about personality issues between the two leaders. I mean, they openly despise each other. I mean, could you ever, Jan, see a coalition working with Zuma and Ramaphosa as the leaders of both of those parties?
Well, I think the MK has already expressed itself on that issue, saying that it will not enter into a coalition with the ANC, with with Ramaphosa as president of the ANC. I also think this kind of coalition is the less likely of the different options. If one looks at the MK vote across the country, one does see that about 95% of all the votes that it got came from 3 provinces, which does not really make it a party that speaks to the entire South Africa. And when one then thinks sort of about finding sort of an inclusive solution for the country in the wake of this very ground-shifting election, this may not be, I think, from a strategic point of view, for the African Congress's best partner to unify the country also in the wake of a very divisive election campaign.
Okay, Mondli, what are the issues? I mean, what's going to be on the negotiating table? What's the ANC going to have to give up?
If the ANC goes into coalition with the Democratic Alliance, it is going to mean that the Democratic Alliance has already put on the table the issue of the national health insurance that the ANC rammed through. Is similar to the NHS in the United Kingdom, and the ANC rammed through Parliament, and it was signed by the president in the final days of the last administration. There's an education bill that the Democratic Alliance is rejecting, that the ANC has pushed forward. But I think there'll also be a lot of demands around. I mean, like there'll be a lot of differences, I think, around our position on the Palestine-Israel issue. And I think that's been underplayed a lot. The Democratic Alliance is very much in favor of Israel and is not committed to the Palestinian cause. And the ANC is very much committed to that. It's going to be a big issue because the AA government will have to take a position on that. And I think it'll be an issue that will definitely come up. Yeah. With the EFF, it's going to be economic. The EFF has very strong left-wing economic positions that, as I mentioned earlier on, that the ANC doesn't. Jan did point out that I think a coalition with the MK party is a fantasy that will never happen. There's enemyhood there that cannot be overcome.
It's just not going to work. Malaika, I guess just moving to the issues, and there are many that face South Africans at this point in time. What do the majority of South Africans actually want from their government right now? And what combination of coalition is actually best to deal with those issues?
I mean, I think fundamentally South Africans were voting for or against, depending on how you look at it, better, really better, a better life, a better standard of living. South Africans were also voting on the land question, like I've said, with communities like Iskama's and making a protest, disengagement with the voting process. So issues around, the land question were clearly very prominent in this election, even as they've not been, really outlined and engaged in their fullness. Issues around really just the cost of living, the standards of living, but for young people in South Africa as well, issues of unemployment. The issue of unemployment is a very, very big question. You would know that the South African official unemployment rate stands at about just over 32%, but youth unemployment stands at just over 60%, the highest in the world. And young people constituted 42.5% of the voters in this election. And that's a very huge number of people. And they, one of the things they keep saying all the time is that, this issue of unemployment, issues of poverty and structural inequalities. So I do think that those are the key issues. And I think, the voters have already, I mean, I think looking at the results, we do hear what voters already are saying. Yeah. The majority of South Africa, clearly what they are saying very clearly is that they don't believe that the ANC can go at this alone, that they believe that the ANC on its own is not capable of resolving these issues, that it should be part of a bigger the table should be bigger and it should involve more people on the table, some of whom might have some of the solution to some of these questions and some which might not. And that's where maybe the ANC comes in and where other parties do come in. But I just think, let me just quickly say, I think that I don't agree with Mondli that an MK-ANC coalition is very unlikely and is never going to happen. Because as he correctly characterized, a lot of these conflicts between the ANC and the MK is largely issue of personalities. And I think when issues of personality are out of the table, and those can always be negotiated, there's always room for dialogue.
Okay, Jan, just going back to the inequality, poverty and unemployment that is facing South Africans at this point in time, who do you think is best? As part of that coalition, who is best served, who is best going to serve the people of South Africa in dealing with those issues?
Well, I think maybe just to go back to your question also about the issues that animate South Africans, particularly voters, we have completed a nationally representative survey about 2 weeks before the elections, and we've asked voters just this question: which issues will influence your vote? The three questions or big issues that came up was unemployment, definitely highest among 71% of our respondents, followed by the question of electricity provision, which is a major issue in South Africa because it also impacts on the question of employment. And then thirdly, the question of corruption.
Yes.
And then there are many other issues, but mainly issues that affect the livelihoods of South Africans and their ability to have economic agency. Back to the question on who would be best positioned, I think it would be those parties that will be able to bring their voters along with them in a coalition, because there will be trade-offs on all sides. There will be trade-offs that the ANC will have to make. But I think if one just thinks of the one option, the more centrist coalition with the Democratic Alliance, it will also have to make trade-offs with its particular sort of constituency and also negotiate these. And there is a possibility also for them losing votes, because the Western Cape province, in which the DA is quite strong, has rejected the ANC quite strongly over the past 2 decades.
Unfortunately, we will have to leave it there, but we really do look forward to seeing how exactly how this is going to play out over the next couple of weeks. Malaika, Jan, Mondli, thanks so much for joining us here on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Tom McRae, and the whole team here, bye for now.